almost everything written about forgiveness begins in the wrong place. It begins with the person who hurt you and asks how you might let go of what was done. That question is real, and we will reach it, but it is the second question, not the first. The harder and more neglected one points the other way, at the person you are least inclined to release, yourself. Before you can genuinely forgive anyone else, you have to do something most of us are never taught how to do. You have to forgive yourself first, not because you matter more than those you have wronged, or those who have wronged you. Because the two acts are the same gesture pointed in opposite directions, and the inward one comes first, the mercy you cannot extend to yourself is the mercy you will never manage to extend to anyone.
Si sûr, main dans la main sans jamais douter. Mais ce nouveau marche à mes côtés.
Start with a distinction that the psychologist Helen Lewis first drew sharply in the early 1970s, and that Jung Tangney and her colleagues have spent the decades since confirming with data. It is the difference between guilt and shame. We use the words as if they name the same feeling. They do not, and the gap between them is close to the gap between healing and not healing. Guilt is about behavior. It says, I did something bad. Its object is an act, something you did that sits outside you and can be examined, named, and often repaired. Guilt is painful but workable, because it points at a thing in the world and says, in effect, go and put that right. It is the psychological engine behind apology, amends, and the changed conduct that proves the apology meant anything. In the research, guilt turns out to be associated with empathy, with taking responsibility, with constructive repair. It is oddly on your side. It still assumes you are capable of doing better, or it would not bother directing you toward repair. Shame is about the self. It says, I am bad, not I did a cruel thing, but I am a cruel person, not I failed, but I am a failure. And here is the structural problem. You cannot repair a self the way you can repair an act. There is nothing to go and fix, because the verdict is not about a deed, but about your nature. And your nature feels fixed.
Pourtant quelque chose en moi hésite. Je marche près de lui. Pas vraiment sûr. Tous les amoureux semblent si sûrs de perdre le cœur tranquille. Mais ce nouveau marche avec moi et je marche encore un peu fragile.
So shame does not send you outward to make things right, it sends you into hiding. The studies are consistent and counterintuitive on this point. Shame-prone people, far from being more moral, tend to be more defensive, more prone to deflect blame, more likely to lash out, and more likely to repeat the very behavior they are ashamed of. Shame attacks the entire self so totally that it dissolves the very agent who might have acted differently. If you are the problem, there is no spare, intact part of you left over to fix it, so you flinch, you conceal, you repeat. This is the corrosive irony at the center of the feeling. The emotion we imagine burns the badness out of us is the one most likely to keep the badness in place. The practical consequence is that when you find yourself convicting yourself in the small hours, the single most useful thing you can do is to identify which of these two is speaking. If the voice is saying you did something that hurt someone and you need to make it right, that is guilt, and it deserves a hearing because it is trying to lead you somewhere. If the voice is saying you are the kind of person who hurts people, you are broken, you always were, that is shame, and it is not telling you the truth. Shame is not justice. It is not even accountability, though it performs an extraordinary impression of accountability, and that impression is precisely the trap that keeps people inside it for years. Underneath the trap sits a belief that almost everyone holds without examining it, that punishing yourself is a form of taking responsibility, that the suffering is the price, that to set it down would be to get away with something. It is worth bringing the philosophy of punishment to bear here because it dismantles the belief completely. When societies justify punishment at all, they appeal to roughly 4 rationales. There is deterrence. Punishment discourages future offences. There is rehabilitation. It reforms the offender. There is restoration. It repairs the harm done to the victim. And there is retribution, the idea that wrongdoing simply deserves a proportionate response, that the moral books require balancing. Hold your own self-punishment up against each of these and watch it fail. Does your suffering deter anything? The wrong is already done. You cannot deter the past. Does it rehabilitate you? The opposite. A person consumed by shame has no energy left for the work of becoming better. The rumination devours the very resources that reform would require. Does it restore anything to the person you harmed? It does not. They do not heal because you cannot sleep, and your absorption in your own guilt typically makes you less available to them, not more. Only the 4th rationale, retribution, seems to apply. The intuition that you deserve to suffer in proportion to what you did. But retribution, even where one accepts it in justice, is meant to be administered, proportionate, and finite. It has an end. The self-punishment that runs in the mind for decades has no proportion and no end. It is not retribution. It is a life sentence handed down for a crime that, in many cases, would have warranted an apology and an afternoon. So we mistake the intensity of the suffering for the seriousness of the accountability. Because it hurts so much, we reason, surely we are doing the right thing. But pain is not evidence of growth. Very often the self-hatred and the failing it claims to condemn are not enemies at all, but partners. The shame supplying exactly the sense of worthlessness from which the failing keeps issuing. The drinker who despises himself each morning and drinks again each night is not taking responsibility for the drinking. He is running a ritual of self-condemnation that leaves the behavior precisely where it was and arguably feeds it. Why then do we cling to self-punishment so faithfully if it satisfies none of the purposes punishment is supposed to serve? Because it is, paradoxically, the easier road. It is easier to hate yourself than to look directly at what you did, own it without flinching, make the repair, and then set the weight down and live forward as someone still capable of good. To be forgiven, even by your own hand, is to be released into a future in which you are responsible for what you do next.
Já chorei o que tinha que chorar. Agora eu fico onde eu sou. Devagar, sem pressa de chegar. Oh, laia, laia, laia. Oh, laia, laia. Oh, laia, laia, laia. Oh, laia, laia, laia. Tem café.
Many people would rather keep flogging the past than face that demand. Self-punishment, for all its misery, is a place to hide from your own freedom. So what does forgiving yourself actually require? Not the counterfeit, which is simply letting yourself off, deciding the wrong did not matter, that the people you hurt should get over it, that none of it was really your fault. That is not forgiveness but evasion, and some part of you always knows it, which is why the evasion never produces peace. You can win the argument for your own innocence completely and still be convicted at 3 a.m. because the psyche has a stubborn resistance to its own propaganda. Real self-forgiveness runs the other way. It looks at the wrong more clearly than the evasion ever could, and only then releases the punishment. It requires, first, a more exact truth than shame permits. This sounds backwards, since we think of shame as merciless honesty. It is not honest. It hands you a blurred, total verdict, bad person, and loops on it without ever examining the particulars. It is in fact a way of avoiding the specific truth by drowning it in a global one, so the discipline is to replace the blur with precision. What exactly did you do? Who was harmed and how much? What did you genuinely owe and to whom? What part was yours and what part belonged to circumstance, to other people, to forces you did not control? Almost always, the precise truth turns out to be smaller and more human than the verdict made it. Not weightless, not excusable, but human-sized. You cannot make amends to a monster. You can make amends for a specific act, and the act is what actually happened. It requires, second, responsibility, which is constantly confused with shame and is its opposite. Responsibility says, that was mine, I own it, without theatrics, and without the collapse that shame stages. The wailing of I'm the worst, how could I, is frequently a performance, sometimes one quietly fishing for reassurance. Responsibility does not perform, it asks only, what does this require of me now? And the answer is repair, wherever repair is possible. Self-forgiveness does not let you skip this. The road to releasing yourself runs straight through the apology made and the conduct changed, not around them. And it requires, third and hardest, the actual release. And this is the part nearly everyone misses, because some wrongs cannot be repaired. The person may be gone. The window may have closed. When there is genuinely nothing left to do, the guilt does not have anywhere to go, and so it stays. The threshold of self-forgiveness is the decision made at exactly that point that your continued suffering serves no one, and to set it down regardless. Not because you have earned the right. You may never feel you have earned it, and if you wait for that feeling, you will wait forever. You set it down because carrying it brings no one back and unbreaks nothing. It only removes one more person, you, still living, still capable of doing some good, from the field. There is no virtue in that removal. No one is honored by your ruin. The capacity that makes this release possible has a name in the research, self-compassion, studied most extensively by the psychologist Kristin Neff. Her central finding cuts against the grain of how most of us were raised. We assume that being hard on ourselves is what keeps us disciplined, that the inner critic, however cruel, is necessary, and that without the lash we would grow lazy and self-indulgent. The data point the other way. People who can meet their own failures with some kindness are more likely to take responsibility for them, more likely to try again, more likely to actually change, precisely because they are not spending all their resources defending a self under siege. Neff frames self-compassion as 3 components held together, and the precision matters because the term invites every possible misreading. The first is self-kindness. refusing to be crueler to yourself than you would be to someone you love. The second she calls common humanity, recognizing that to fail, to fall short, to wound someone you never meant to wound is not your private defect, but the baseline condition of being a person. The belief that your failure isolates you from the rest of humanity is itself a quiet grandiosity. The third is mindfulness, facing the pain plainly, neither suppressing it nor drowning in it. None of this is self-pity, and none of it is excuse-making. It is the posture from which change becomes possible at all. There is a genuine philosophical puzzle lurking here, and it is worth naming rather than stepping around, because it is the kind of objection a thoughtful person will raise.
Trying to remember who I used to be. These electric nights are stealing my heart, but I'm tired of this neon fantasy. Strangers' faces flicker like a screen in this midnight fever dream machine. I keep searching for something real in a world that's forgotten how to feel.
Some philosophers argue that forgiveness is inherently relational, that to forgive is something one person does for another in response to a wrong done to them, and that forgiving yourself is therefore a confusion, even a contradiction. If you wronged someone else, the thinking goes, it is theirs to forgive, not yours. There is something to this, and taking it seriously sharpens what self-forgiveness actually is. It is not the power to absolve yourself of a debt owed to another. You cannot do that, and pretending you can is the evasion again. It is rather the reconciliation of a divided self, the part of you that committed the wrong and the part of you that has to go on living as the person who committed it. What self-forgiveness restores is not your standing with your victim, which only they can grant, but your standing with yourself, what the philosophers Geoffrey Murphy and Jean Hampton would call self-respect. You can owe a debt to someone you can no longer reach, take full responsibility for it, and still refuse to let it annihilate your capacity to live and to do good. That refusal is not absolution. It is the decision to remain a functioning moral agent rather than a permanent defendant. This is why we cannot begin with the others. The principle is nearly a law of the inner life. You cannot give what you do not have. The person who has never forgiven himself can perform forgiveness toward others, but he cannot truly extend it, because the same merciless judge remains on the bench inside him, and a judge who shows himself no mercy will, in the end, show no one real mercy. You can see the pattern in how such a person treats the world. Often he turns hard on everyone, quick to convict and slow to pardon, holding others to the impossible standard he holds himself to, because every flaw in another is a mirror he cannot bear. Or he swings to the opposite failure and becomes indiscriminately permissive, unable to hold anyone to account, because he has no working concept of how a person could do real wrong and remain worthy. The two cannot coexist in his mind, so he denies the wrong to preserve the worth. Both are the absence of forgiveness. Only the person who has felt, in his own case, what it is to be both genuinely responsible and genuinely released can offer that same combination to anyone else. When we turn outward, the first task is to clear away the misunderstandings, because they are the reason many thoughtful and self-respecting people refuse to forgive and refuse for what they take to be moral reasons. They have been handed the wrong definition. The largest confusion is between forgiveness and reconciliation. These are distinct. Reconciliation is the rebuilding of a relationship. It takes two parties, and it rightly depends on the offender acknowledging the harm, changing, and demonstrating over time that he is trustworthy again. Forgiveness is something you can do alone. It is an internal act, the release of the debt, the relinquishing of the claim to revenge, and the demand that the other suffer in proportion. You can forgive someone completely and never speak to them again. You can forgive them and keep the door bolted because they are not safe, and wisdom says keep them out. Forgiveness is not the same as trust. Trust must be earned back through changed behavior, and you never owe it to someone who has not earned it. Most of the resistance to forgiving comes from the fear that it means reopening yourself to harm, that to forgive is to let the offender back in, or to declare the wrong acceptable. It means neither. You are not obligated to hand the knife back to the person who used it. Forgiveness and boundaries are not opposites but partners. You forgive so that you are free, and you keep the boundary so that you are safe. The second confusion is between forgiveness and forgetting. The old instruction to forgive and forget asks the impossible and then makes you feel a failure for not achieving it. The memory of a wrong is information. It tells you who someone is and how to protect yourself. To erase it would be to make yourself defenseless. Forgiveness does not require amnesia. It requires a changed relationship to the memory, so that it can return without seizing you each time. The aim is not a mind that has forgotten, but a memory that has lost its power to wound on contact. The third confusion is between forgiveness and condoning, and here the philosophy becomes important, because clearing up this confusion is what makes forgiveness compatible with self-respect rather than opposed to it. To forgive is not to say the act was acceptable, it is closer to the reverse. You only ever forgive what was genuinely wrong. The acceptable requires no forgiveness, only acceptance. Forgiveness begins with the full acknowledgement that a real wrong occurred, that you were owed something you did not receive, that a line was crossed, that the hurt was legitimate, and only then releases the debt. This is precisely what gives the act its weight. A forgiveness that first shrinks the wrong to nothing has forgiven nothing. It was the 18th century philosopher and bishop Joseph Butler who saw this most clearly in two sermons that remain the foundation of the entire philosophical literature on the subject. Butler argued that resentment is a natural passion, even a useful and morally serious one. It is the mind's response to injury and injustice, a form of protest that registers that something wrong has happened and that you matter enough to be wronged. He did not think forgiveness meant the elimination of resentment. He thought it meant its moderation, refusing to let a legitimate response to wrong curdle into settled malice, into the desire for the other's suffering as an end in itself. This is a crucial correction to the sentimental view, and Murphy and Hampton extended it 2 centuries later. They warned that forgiving too readily before the wrong has been properly registered can itself be a moral failing, a form of servility, a quiet declaration that you did not really matter, that the violation of your dignity was not worth taking seriously. Self-respect can require a period of resentment. Forgiveness is not the suppression of that response, but its eventual deliberate release, and the difference between the two is the difference between health and self-abandonment. So what is actually happening when you refuse to forgive, and what does the refusal cost the one who refuses? Here the psychology and the philosophy converge on the same answer. Nietzsche gave the philosophical name for the unprocessed grudge. Ressentiment, the slow poisoning of a person by an impotent, rehearsed vengefulness that can find no outlet and so turns inward, reshaping the whole personality around the injury. He understood that the grudge held too long does not preserve your dignity, it deforms it. The person organized around an old wound becomes, over time, a person made of the wound. The psychology has since measured what Nietzsche described. In a well-known set of experiments, the psychologist Charlotte vanOyen Witvliet had people vividly recall a real offense and rehearse the grievance, then measured the body. Rehearsing the wound produced exactly the physiology of present threat: elevated heart rate, higher blood pressure, increased stress hormones, muscular tension, the body mobilizing against an injury that, in fact, ended long ago. When the same people were instead guided toward empathy or forgiveness, the body settled. The implication is stark. The threat the body is responding to is not the original event, which is over. The threat is the holding. And the holding happens entirely in you. The person you refuse to forgive is, very plausibly, not thinking about you at all. The offense that has organized years of your inner life may never have registered in his. Your resentment does not reach him. It does the damage to you and only to you. The grudge you keep in order to punish him is, in the most literal and measurable sense, punishing you. This is the truth in the old line that holding a grudge is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. The poison does not travel. It stays in the body that drank it. There is a subtler cost beyond the physiological one, which the philosopher Hannah Arendt articulated more deeply than anyone. In The Human Condition, Arendt observed that human action has a tragic structure. It is irreversible. Once a deed is done, it cannot be undone, and its consequences ripple outward without end. If we had no remedy for this, every wrong ever done would bind us forever. We would be permanent prisoners of single past acts, our own and others. Forgiveness, Arendt argued, is the human faculty that releases us from this trap, the one power we have to interrupt the otherwise endless chain of consequence and begin something new. Without it, she wrote, we would be confined to a single deed from which we could never recover. This reframes the whole matter. Forgiveness is not weakness or capitulation. It is the specifically human capacity to refuse to be defined forever by what was done, the only thing that makes a livable future possible after harm. The refusal to forgive keeps you tethered to the offender. While the account stays open, you remain in a bitter, one-sided relationship with him. He lives in your head and sets your moods years after he left your life. You imagine the grudge as a wall between you. It is a rope, and you are holding both ends. A warning is necessary here because there is a counterfeit forgiveness that does more harm than honest resentment, precisely because it forecloses the healing it imitates. It is the premature, declared forgiveness. I forgive him. I've let it go. I'm at peace. Pronounced before the anger has been felt, the wound examined, or the cost admitted. There is a name for this in the psychological literature. Spiritual bypassing, a term coined by the psychologist John Wellwood for the use of spiritual ideas and language to avoid unresolved emotional work. Bypassing forgiveness does not last, because nothing was released. You cannot release what you refuse to pick up and look at. The anger does not vanish on announcement. It goes underground and leaks out sideways, as coldness, as tension, as a bitterness that surfaces at odd moments. Butler's point returns here in another form. The resentment was trying to tell you something true, and forgiveness that skips the resentment skips the truth. Real forgiveness therefore moves through the anger rather than around it, and this is where Carl Jung's concept of the shadow becomes more than a metaphor. Jung used the term for the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge, including the cruelty and the vengefulness, the dark satisfaction we would feel if we were honest at the suffering of the one who hurt us. Because we prefer to think of ourselves as kind and above all that, we disown these impulses. But Jung's central insight was that the disowned does not disappear. It descends into the unconscious and, unwatched, gains power rather than losing it. The vengefulness we will not claim comes out indirectly, in cold withdrawal, in small, unacknowledged punishments, in the hope beneath the forgiving words that the other gets what is coming. The way through is not to pretend the shadow is absent, which is what empowers it, but to turn and look at it, and to admit plainly, part of me wants him to suffer. Part of me keeps this account open because the bitterness feels like the only power I have over what happened. Only what is consciously held can be consciously released. Repression is not forgiveness. It is the grudge, hidden now even from yourself, doing its work where you can no longer reach it. So honest forgiveness has stages, and they cannot be skipped. To feel the anger fully, to tell the truth about your own shadow, and only then, with all of it in the open, to release the debt, not because you have stopped feeling it, but because you have decided, in full knowledge of what you are carrying, that carrying it costs more than it could ever be worth. One further distinction lifts an enormous and unnecessary burden, and it comes from the psychologist Everett Worthington, who has studied forgiveness more rigorously than almost anyone, and who arrived at it partly through the murder of his own mother. A fact worth knowing only because it means none of this was theorized at a safe distance. Worthington distinguishes decisional forgiveness from emotional forgiveness. Decisional forgiveness is an act of the will, a commitment to release the debt, to forego revenge, to stop feeding the grudge. You can make that decision today while you are still angry and the wound is still open. It is a change of intention, like turning toward a destination you cannot yet see. Emotional forgiveness is the slower transformation, the gradual replacement of the hot resentment with something cooler, the day you find that the memory has lost its grip, the eventual arrival of something like neutrality or even compassion. This cannot be willed in a moment. It can take months or years, and it comes in waves. There will be days the old anger floods back at full strength, and you are certain you have failed. You have not. The lag between the decision and the feeling is not failure, but the ordinary structure of the human heart, which does not turn on command. You make the decision, which is yours to make, and then you keep making it, and the feeling follows on its own schedule. This is why the developmental psychologist Robert Enright, often called the founder of the scientific study of forgiveness, describes it as a process rather than an event, a sequence of phases worked through over time, not a single moment of resolution. The popular image of forgiveness as a switch that flips, a door that closes cleanly, sets people up to fail, because real forgiveness is closer to the way one quits a deep habit. Not once and forever, but again and again, until one day you notice you have not had to do it in a while. The relapse is not the failure, the returning to the work is the practice. Then comes the case that breaks every comfortable account, when the apology never comes, and never will. Much of how we imagine forgiveness secretly depends on the offender doing his part, admitting the wrong, asking, allowing the books to be squared before the debt is released. Some philosophers, such as Charles Griswold, have argued that this dyadic form, in which the offender repents and the victim responds, is the paradigm case of forgiveness, its fullest and most complete expression, and in an ideal world it would be. But the world rarely supplies it. The offender may never apologize, may sincerely believe he did nothing wrong, may have constructed a story in which he was the victim, may have moved on untroubled, may be dead. If forgiveness genuinely required his participation, then your peace would be permanently hostage to the people least likely to grant it. And the crueler and less repentant the offender, the longer your sentence. That cannot be a defensible moral picture. It would mean the wicked own the peace of the wronged. This is why the deepest tradition of thinking about forgiveness insists that, in the hardest cases, it must be possible unilaterally. Something you can do alone, without the offender's apology, acknowledgement, or even knowledge. The French philosopher Vladimir Jankelevich pressed the paradox to its limit. He argued that true forgiveness shows itself precisely where it seems impossible, in the face of the unforgivable, because anything easier is merely excusing or forgetting. What you release, in this hardest case, is the hope of a different past, the fantasy that he will one day wake up, understand, return, and undo the harm at its root. While you grip the grudge, some part of you is still waiting for that rewrite, keeping the account open against a payment that will never arrive. To forgive here is to close the account, to accept that it happened exactly as it happened, that it will not be undone, that no apology is coming, and to release the demand that it be otherwise, not because the wrong was acceptable, but because you cannot live fully in a present spent entirely waiting for a past to be repaired. At some point, the waiting itself becomes more destructive than the original wound. Forgiveness, in the end, is the decision to stop waiting. It is worth noting that not every serious thinker is sanguine about forgiveness even here. The philosopher Martha Nussbaum has argued in recent work that much of what we call forgiveness is contaminated by a backward-looking wish for payback that is fundamentally irrational, since the other's suffering cannot undo your own. She suggests the healthier movement is what she calls the transition, a turning away from the scorekeeping altogether and toward the future, toward your own welfare and even, where possible, generosity. Whether one calls the result forgiveness or something past forgiveness, the practical counsel converges with everything else. The backward-looking grip on the debt is the thing to release, and the release is for the sake of a future that the grip makes impossible. There is one image from religious tradition worth borrowing whatever you believe, because it captures the structural unity of the whole matter in a single word. In the prayer Christians have repeated for 2,000 years, one line asks to be forgiven as we forgive others. Not and. The small word as ties the two directions into a single act and quietly insists they were never two things. The mercy you take in and the mercy you give out are the same substance moving through one channel. Block it in either direction, and it ceases to flow in both. The person who cannot forgive others cannot fully receive forgiveness either, not because some external judge withholds it, but because the same hardness that refuses to extend it refuses also to let it in. This is not theology so much as psychology stated early and well. Reception and extension are one capacity, and you cannot have only half of it. Which returns us to where we began. To forgive yourself and to forgive another are one gesture pointed two ways. Both look directly at a real wrong without shrinking or relabeling it. Both hold someone fully responsible, you or him, without flinching. And both make the same choice, the one that breaks the logic of the ledger. To release a debt you have every right to keep collecting, because the collecting has become the thing destroying you. What forgiveness offers in either direction is never the rewriting of what happened. The past is fixed, the harm was real, the scar remains. What changes is who you have to be while you carry it, whether you carry the wound as an open grievance that runs your life from the shadows, or as a healed scar, still present, still part of you, no longer in command. The event does not change. The one carrying it is the only thing that can, and the only thing forgiveness ever touches. You will still remember, and you are meant to. The remembering keeps you wise and keeps you safe, but there is all the difference between a memory that informs you and one that imprisons you, between a teacher you consult and a jailer you serve. Forgiveness, in both directions, is the slow work of moving a memory from the second category into the first. Begin with yourself. Not by declaring yourself innocent. You may carry real wrongs, and the honest road runs straight through them, through the truth, the responsibility, and the repair, none of which can be skipped. But once that road has been walked, the discipline is to refuse to keep serving a sentence that helps no one, and removes from the world the one person who can still do some good in it, which is you, still here, still capable of becoming someone the past could never have predicted. And once you have taken that mercy from your own hands and let it land, you will find, almost by surprise, that you finally have some to extend, the old grudges begin to look less like justice and more like rope. The ledger begins to weigh more than the debts recorded in it. That is the first forgiveness and the last one. The one you give yourself so that you finally have something left to give away.